Hello and welcome to Broken Entertainment. Sorry for the delay in videos here, but I got sick and then got this nasty cough that still hasn't quite gone away. So it took some time off. But I wanted to we've got Isom 2 of the Rippaverse comics came out very recently, and now you have Alphacore coming out. And that one's written by Chuck Dixon and not by Eric July. So I expect that to be a little different than the first two books, which I think is fine. And I'm kind of interested to see that one. I initially planned to buy Isom 2 when it was going to be released, and then I just kind of lost interest. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to do a review on Isom 1 and go over why I lost interest with Isom 2 and why I think there's a lot of criticisms that are not really being addressed. When they are addressed, they're kind of shoved off to the side, discarded, and ignored. And I've seen him talk to Ethan Van Sciver, I've seen him talk to a couple other people, and just kind of shut down their criticism. And I think that's unfortunate, because what I like about the Rippaverse is the way it's presented as an independent comic book company, and they're going to do everything out in the open and transparently, and so on and so forth. And I'm all about indie stuff. That's the big thing to me, is the entertainment renaissance, as I call it. It's people producing stuff independently to take the place of stuff that people are walking away from, Star Wars, Marvel, etc. Because our current mainstream entertainment doesn't know how to present us with entertainment we actually want. They're trying to lecture people, they're trying to shove agendas into stuff, and they're producing just generally bad writing anymore. And so I got Isom 1 when it came out, and first read through, I liked it. I was like, okay, this isn't bad. I wasn't like, hey, this is amazing, but it wasn't bad. It's not as good as Cyberfrog. It's not as good as She. It's not as good as a couple other comics that I have from indie side, but it's better than, for example, the Hawkgirl comic series that came out from DC recently. That was trash. And so I started to think about it, and I started to listen to other people criticize it and get their kind of perspective before I put this together. Now, when I got the comic, I decided not to review it initially because I only have a physical copy. And I don't have a good setup for showing a physical copy. So I've taken a couple of pictures that just kind of highlight an issue that we'll go over. And I just took it with my phone. Yes, eventually I need to join the 21st century and have a webcam. We're getting there. At some point that'll happen. No, you won't see my face. But I will probably use the webcam for some streaming stuff and some ideas that I have. And to do comic reviews. The problem with Isom 1 and the problem with Isom 2, now I have not bought Isom 2, but I do know how it's written. I have seen the pages. I have read critical story moments, etc. But we'll focus on 1. The biggest problem with Isom 1 that really keeps it from being as compelling and interesting as it should be is that Isom 1 is trying to do way too much. And I've seen conversations with Eric July where he denies this. Says it's trying to set up so on and so forth. We're trying to get the concepts of the universe out there and, leave a bunch of stuff open. But what you're really getting is essentially mystery box theater. You're getting a whole bunch of, what's that? But you're not getting resolution. You're not getting information. Forget resolution, it's issue 1. You're not getting information for the most part. You're just getting stuff, and it feels at times thrown at the wall. Like, oh, here's this character. You start with a very simple story, right? You start with this guy named Avery. He used to be a superhero. You don't know much about him. Seems to be really strong and durable. And you see him get called to action by his mother, who says, hey, this person is missing. Please go check this out. He goes, he checks it out, gets in a fight with a gang leader, a cartel kind of guy, gets beat up by his henchmen, and then the story kind of goes to him feeling disrespected. But then, in the middle of getting his ass kicked, in the middle of that, he meets another character named Yaira, who then also kicks his ass. And he sees Alphacore, who is this group of superhero cop type people. And it's just kind of all thrown at you. And then he leaves, and you never hear from him again. And, the argument is, well, yes, we're introducing the world in this book. We're introducing the setting. We're introducing these concepts. And then if you want to know more about them, you read their books. There's an Alphacore book coming out. There's a Yaira book coming out, etc., etc. The problem is, you have to do things carefully with writing. And you can't present too much information and too much stuff, or it really detracts from the story. And the end result is there's a bunch of stuff in Isom 1, and some of it's not organic to the story, some of it's just kind of there, and the whole point of it being there is so you look at it and go, I need to buy that. Do we resolve the investigation? No. Totally fine. Issue number 1 of, I think 3. It's fine to not resolve your primary conflict, but they should have done something more than what happened. And then you don't really see a whole lot regarding that investigation. He just goes and beats some people up. Then you get this nice little speech from the cartel guy about Empire and blah, blah, blah. I want you to go hit him back, kill his family, etc., etc. Usual cartel stuff. And he goes and gets his suit and puts it on. And that's where you leave. You don't get... He still has no information on Jasmine's whereabouts, or what she's doing with the cartel, or what's going on in that regard. And you're still trying to wrestle with all this other information that's been presented. And it's not that it makes the book terrible, but it's very distracting and it's very unresolved. And then you still don't resolve it in issue 2. So then we get to this fight. This is the second fight in Isom 1 between him, Avery, and I forget the guy's name, the henchman. And this is a great example of what I'm talking about, because it introduces another concept, and it literally comes out of nowhere. And if you actually read the page, I've got it focused into 3 different pictures. If you actually read the page, it makes no organic sense whatsoever. It's just info dump. And it completely disrupts the flow of what's going on, and then they start fighting. So, here you have the top. If you weren't so self-absorbed, you could see there's a lot of money to be made in being what you are. You wouldn't have to lose 3 consecutive fights for free. If you're special, they call you an accept. You and I know that's a generalization. We differ in many ways, different paths to being what we are, a scale. And this is why I'm not fond of the term accept. It's literally that paragraph has no value in this part of the story. I know you're trying to introduce the concept of accepts, and that's great, but you need to do it organically. And instead you've got this weird, I'm going to define what an accept is to a guy who knows what an accept is. It's literally an as-you-know moment. And an as-you-know moment is when a character turns to another character and says, as you know, and then proceeds to provide a bunch of exposition. Both characters already know. But it's presented to the reader, or the viewer, or what have you. But both characters already know this information. They have no reason to have this conversation at all. And he tries to frame it as being like, hey, we're both this thing. I don't like this term. but it doesn't work. It doesn't fit organically with this part, because he's talking about, hey, you know what we are, and you could totally make some money. And then he goes into this, I'm going to define an accept, I'm going to explain how it works in the universe, and I'm going to tell you the information the reader is going to need to know at some other date. You don't even need to know it in this comic. That's the thing. Like, you could have somebody refer to them as accepts in passing or in commentary and not go into this information, and your reader's going to fill in the blanks. And then you kind of lay out how it works organically over time as you release new books, because you immediately know, except, okay, these guys obviously have powers, obviously, therefore, somebody with powers is called an accept, like calling them a mutant or what have you. But instead we get this weird paragraph, and then, like some sort of strange Twitter argument, Avery goes, it's just a term that people use to identify it. Caught on, and here we are. It has nothing to do with this fight. He's right. It has nothing to do with this fight. So why is it here? Other than the reader needs to know this at some point. But we don't really need to know in that way. You don't have to lay it out inorganically. You need to lay it out organically. You need to provide clues, information over time, rather than info dump. And it completely does, because you're about to have this awesome fight, and there's kind of this weird conversation beforehand too, where they go out to the parking lot to fight, and Avery just starts stretching, and they're having this conversation while he's stretching, and it's just very weird. Where, the henchman basically says, hey, we should have ensured your defeat. We didn't do it right. I shouldn't have let you come back, etc., etc. He claims not to be, I'm no hero. I came to your shot caller with respect and was met with disrespect, and that cannot be tolerated. And they're just having this conversation about why they're going to fight, but we already know why they're going to fight. It's evident. And he's stretching in the middle of it, which is weird because he just got done fighting other people, so he's already limbered up. But that's not that big a deal. It's just, it's weird. It's a weird, disjointed fight that disrupts the flow twice. The first time when they go outside and just have this conversation about, hey, here's why we're fighting. And then the second time, this conversation that you've got on screen. And you get a lot of this in Isom 1. You get weird, kind of clunky dialogue that's introducing concepts. You get bits and pieces of the universe thrown at you. And I thought, that's kind of weird. Like, I get what you're trying to do, but so what I did is I was looking at this conversation. I'm going to bring it up. This is on Twitter, obviously. Or Twix, or Zeet, or whatever they're going to call it. X is such a stupid name. Stephen Gino kind of lays it out pretty well, too. The problem is, you tried to put so many things in a single issue. Like, you went from Isom being tasked by his sister, I said his mother, sister, to the gangsters, to Alphacore, to Yaira, to Accepts, to gangsters again, and left everything unconcluded, and in the second issue, added even more stuff. And he does. He adds a lot more stuff in the second issue. And he says, I disagree. The gangsters tie into Task. Alphacore and Yaira were only a few pages. That should have been more. The problem is, you're right, they are only a few pages, and they literally just show up. Like, he gets thrown through the air and hits somebody, hits Yaira, and she beats him up, and Alphacore arrives, and they leave. And it's so disjointed and random. It's like, and they make sure to name drop both Alphacore and Yaira. And it's just there. You can tell as a reader. It's just there so that you can see it. You can't write something with the intent of putting things in there just so you can see it, or just so you can info dump it, because, oh, you spent a lot of time making this, or, oh, I want people to get interested in this. You want people to get interested in it. If you have a really good story, Isom 1 should have been all about this gangster stuff. And maybe find an organic way to bring up Alphacore, like somebody saying, you know, why don't you go to Alphacore after he gets beat up? And you can go, I don't want to deal with Alphacore, blah, 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 blah. Don't get they literally thrown into the fight between Yaira and Alphacore. And now, I like the concept of Yaira. I don't care about the concept of Alphacore. I've seen plenty of concepts like it before. It's not that interesting to me. I might buy the book just because it has Chuck Dixon writing it, and I want to see how it kind of stacks up compared to the Isom books. And I do want to buy Yaira's book because I am interested in that. And again, written by different authors. The problem is, he says, it's issue 1, launching an arc and a universe. It's not supposed to conclude. And the guy says, it's oversaturated. You should have continued with the gangsters, Jasmine stuff further and hinted at the rest, but instead you kept changing the focus of the story. And he just says, I disagree, it wasn't done. He can disagree, but that is what happens. It's just a bunch of stuff thrown at you in the middle of this other story, and then we forget the other story. Like, yeah, you have the gangster stuff going on, but you forgot the MacGuffin. You left out Jasmine. He doesn't investigate Jasmine at all after the first encounter. I'm assuming he's going to do that at some point in Isom 3. But the problem is, actually, the whole problem is in this statement right here. It's issue 1 launching an arc and a universe. Technically, yes, your first novel, book, or comic, or what have you, in a setting is going to introduce the universe. But you don't write it to introduce the universe. When you write it to introduce the universe, you put a bunch of clunky stuff in there, whether you intend to do it or not. You're going to put a bunch of clunky stuff in there. You know, I've had this problem when I'm writing. And as I've worked on Invasion, and even Agent, where I'm like, oh, I need to mention this. And then I go through the edit, and I'm like, why do I have this in here? It doesn't contribute to the story at all. It doesn't make any sense to the story. Yes, it's part of the universe, but there are other ways to explore that aspect over time with some other story or later in the story. So it's kind of first drafty to me. And I think he put too much emphasis on, we're going to introduce the universe. You had to go into the art. It's fine. This picture is slightly out of focus. That's my fault. Don't blame the art. It's not great. It's not horrible. It has some issues. I'm not an artist. I'm not going to try to go into all of that. There are other people who have done that and done a good job, so I'll leave that. But you're trying to do too much. By not accepting criticism, I should correct that. By not addressing this criticism other than to say, no, that didn't happen, you're missing an opportunity to grow and develop. And I know in Isom 2, this same thing happens. More stuff gets introduced, and you're like, okay, I still want to know what happened to Jasmine. You can deal with the dragon and the hell monkeys and the other stuff later. In fact, maybe that should be an Alphacore story. I don't know. Maybe it is an Alphacore story. Who knows? Book's not out yet. But you gotta... And the reason I bring this up is writers in general, you need to keep this in mind. Yes, you may want to introduce your universe. Yes, you may have a bunch of world building, and you're like, this is really cool, and you want to show it off. But if you do it where you're just inserting stuff, it pulls people out of the story. Like this fight is a great example. It pulls you right out of the fight. The stakes are gone. The pacing is gone. I mean, the pacing is completely destroyed by this conversation. And you know, as a reader, you're like, I'm reading exposition. That's the first thing I thought of reading this paragraph. Like, I'm reading exposition. There needs to be more nuance in this stuff for Isom going forward. And there needs to be narrower focus on the story. You can tell a big story, but it's hard to tell a wide story, if that makes sense, where you're introducing a whole bunch of stuff, and none of it's terribly interconnected. And I know, someone's going to say, oh, no, it's all interconnected. Well, from the perspective of reading Isom 1 and Isom 2, none of it's interconnected. Might it be interconnected later on? Yes, but you're not tying these threads in. You're not interweaving this stuff early on. You're just throwing it out there. That's why I call it mystery box theater, because mystery box, if you're not familiar, is coined by J.J. Abrams. And it's this idea that you introduce a mystery, and there's very little information about it. And then the story is about getting the answer to that mystery. And then when you get to the thing, it's actually not the answer to the mystery, it's another mystery. And then so on down the road, and it doesn't actually matter what's in the mystery box because the answers don't matter. It's the quest that matters. And in this case, you're getting a bunch of mystery boxes. What's Alphacore? I don't know. What's Yaira? I don't know. So on and so forth. Might these be answered later on, eventually? I hope so. Or mystery box theater will apply very, very well. But it's the way it feels at this stage. And yes, I know, Isom 1, it's introducing stuff. It's only the first issue. But if you're going to throw it all in there and you're going to do it really inorganically, it's going to stick out. And it does. And that's got to be corrected moving forward, or eventually you're going to lose people who are just going to go, okay, you're not going to answer any of these questions. You're just going to keep introducing more and more stuff. And that's the problem. It's not just that they're not answering any of these questions. You're not gaining any more information. You got to go buy Yaira. It kind of reminds me of Disney. A simple, narrow story at the street level, which is what this book starts out as. Gradually introducing things would have been fine. Literally throwing you into the middle of stuff and just throwing it out there and then never seeing it again in the book. It's jarring and distracting. Let me know what you thought of it. If you like the video, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Ring the bell for notifications.